Welcome to Yachting International Radio's The Forward Watch podcast, where we navigate the world of luxury yachting one powerful conversation at a time. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a topic every crew member faces, but few speak openly about. How do you talk to millionaires and even billionaires without losing your integrity? Joining us is Captain James, whose reputation, wealth of experience, and candid storytelling offer rare insights into the realities of interacting with high net worth yacht owners, from establishing authentic, open communication to holding your ground in high pressure situations. James breaks down the 3 core principles every captain and crew member should live by. The theme of this interview is how to talk to millionaires without losing your integrity. I've handpicked an amazing captain to join me in this conversation based on his wealth of knowledge, fine reputation, and great experience. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Karine. It's good to be here.
So, when it comes to talking to millionaires, I think you need a suite of skills behind you. Probably, I would say, certainly experience and confidence. As a young captain, it can be extremely intimidating. So, when you learn, or what you've learned around working with millionaires and how to communicate with them, what have been your top lessons around communication specifically?
Top lessons, and some of them are quite hard won as well, Karine. It takes a lot of time and it's easy to make mistakes with these guys, but communicate early with them for me is a big one. Don't leave it to talk to them about, especially problems or, cost or something that's coming up. Communicate early with them. They like to know what's coming up as early as possible, in my experience. I saw it was a movie where they're talking about spies and this sort of thing. And the guy said, look, I like to just give them a little hint of the problem that's coming up and let them digest it. Let them understand that there's something going on. And then I can go back 24 hours later and give them some more information. And I can say, do you remember the conversation we had yesterday about the issue with the generator or the funding request? Well, here's a bit more information. And sometimes that's a little easier for them. But for me, always, if you've got something to communicate to the owner, communicate it to them early.
Okay. So I'd say a very important leadership skill is to learn how to be adaptable, because everyone's different. So there's not one size fits all. There's not one type of formula that could work with dealing with that ultra high net worth individual. So given all the different types of people you've worked with or owners that you've had, is there a particular way of communicating with some types of owners versus others?
I think they're all different. They've all got their method of communication that they prefer. And, on the simplest of forms, that's, one boss would only work with text messages, nothing else. It's just text messages. You could send him an email, but he'd read the sort of top line detail and then it would get lost in his inbox. And he said to me, James, there's hundreds of emails coming into my email inbox every day. Unfortunately, yours will get lost. It'll get buried. Send me a text message. Brilliant. Okay. Others, WhatsApp. So for me, it's finding their method of communication. How do they best receive the information? Some owners like it absolutely brief, just headline points. Give me the absolute bare minimum that I need to make a decision. Other owners want detailed reports. I worked for a family that once a week wanted a detailed report. And then, that would go to them on a Friday. And then on over the weekend or Monday morning, there'd be 20 or 30 questions would come back from that. And that, of course, then led to more and more communication. So they were deeply involved. But for me, you've got to find their method of communication.
Okay. And I would say that would be probably one of the first conversations you have with an owner, because it all comes down to communication.
That's it. How would you like me to communicate with you, sir?
Would you add to that in terms of the points that you would address as you start forging that relationship at the beginning?
Pick the phone up.
Mm.
Pick the phone up and talk to them. If you've got the ability to do that, pick the phone up and talk to them. It's so valuable. Information gets lost in text messages or emails. And to actually talk to somebody, you can answer their questions immediately. You can hear in the tone of their voice whether this is a good time or not. They can ask specific questions. It cuts out that back and forth. Pick the phone up if you can. If you've got the ability to call them, especially on difficult subjects, just go ahead and pick the phone up and talk to them.
Okay. Some captains might be very fearful of doing that. They don't want to worry them, don't want to disturb them, don't want to feel rejected or shut down. So when it comes to the biggest misconceptions crew have when talking to UA, to abbreviate it, what would you say some of the common themes are?
You're right. Lots of people are concerned about the owner's reaction to communication, especially if it's bad news. You hear it from lots of people. Well, the owner won't want to hear this. You can't tell the owner that. You absolutely can, and you absolutely should. As their captain, you should. And I guess you've got to sort of build that relationship from day one with them so that you've got that open line of communication so that they know that you'll contact them if there's a problem. My experience is that they're all human beings. They're interested, most of them are interested in their boats, and they want them to be successful because that's, there's a big investment in there and the return is incredibly valuable to them. Some owners do go over the top on the smallest things, but that's not necessarily your issue as a captain. That's their issue, how they react. As a captain, we've got a duty to pass on information to the owners, and how it's received is kind of, it's their, that's their struggle. Somebody said to me recently, I've stopped feeling sorry for billionaires. And it's about right, isn't it? We didn't decide to buy the boat. We didn't push it on them. So if we're passing on that information, you just got to get on with it. And if they get upset or angry, you've just got to remain calm.
Yeah.
Remember, it's your job to pass on important information, regardless of how this will be perceived. And, right from day one, if you can build up that working relationship with them, they'll understand that if you are contacting them, that there's a reason for that. Yeah.
Okay, great. So talking about intimidation, pushback, obviously intimidation can look very different. It could look like an owner barking orders at you or throwing his toys out the cot, or it could just be you feeling intimidated with speaking to someone who has such influence and power. So if you did get pushback from an owner and it's around a safety issue, how do you handle something like that? Do you have a real life experience to share on how you managed to overcome that?
I think luckily I've never had owners push back on safety related items. At the end of the day, an owner can push back on, let's just say they push back on a safety related item, like putting to sea in horrendous weather.
Okay, yeah.
You've got a couple of choices there into how to deal with it. One, if you as the captain are genuinely concerned for the safety of the vessel, the crew and the guests, then it doesn't matter whether the owner's going blue in the face on the aft deck. If you put to sea and you have a problem, the owner will disappear into the background and say, well, you're the captain. You shouldn't have gone to sea. Look at the damage that's happened, or look at the injury that's occurred, or God forbid, something even worse. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a genuine safety concern, you have to, I often think about this if we're doing something that's a bit like, all right, let's stop a second, let's figure this out before we do it, is I think to myself, if this goes wrong, how would I defend my actions in an MAIB investigation? How, if this, God forbid, this ever went to court, could I defend my choices leading up to this incident? So, an owner yelling and screaming at you is never going to be a defense if you end up in real trouble. So you've got to consider your own personal safety, the safety of the crew, the guests, But then sort of underneath that, if you lose your ticket because you've made a really bad choice because an owner's been screaming at you, well, the owner's not going to support your wages for the next 5, 10, 15 years whilst you rebuild a new career. So although it's a difficult one, if you've got an owner that is really digging in, it's your career, it's your life, and it's the safety of guests. And they'll thank you for it, later on. Now, if you've got some horrendous weather and the owner's still pushing back, I heard from Brendan O'Shaughnessy, a great piece of advice from him. He had an owner that was pushing him to make a particularly unpleasant passage. And he said, "Yep, absolutely fine, sir. Yep, you've got a great boat. Boat will get through, no problems at all. We'll manage all the damage that will occur later on. We can deal with that later, because there's going to be quite a lot of damage that's going to happen to the interior. Hopefully, crew will be okay. We'll have to stop service because that's not going to be safe for the crew. But your boat's fine. We'll still make the passage." And he said you can't keep playing the safety card. It's not safe to go. So it's not safe to go, because he'll rightly turn around and say, "Well, I've bought a great boat, and why is it not safe?" So it was just changing the narrative very slightly as to, well, the boat will make it. It'll be fine, but we'll have to manage the fallout from it afterwards, the aftermath, Just make sure you don't put your fine china down. And he said very quickly, the owner came back, within sort of 10 or 15 minutes, said, "I've had a chat with the other guests and we've decided that we'll stay here tonight and maybe we'll leave tomorrow morning when the weather's calmed down." "Oh, okay, so that's absolutely fine. What a great choice. Okay, well, that'll save us."
I have to say, great decision you made there.
Yeah, that'll save us. That'll save all the fallout from dealing with the damage. So, there's ways to phrase it. If a hard no isn't gonna cut it with an owner, it's trying to rephrase or reframe that decision. And it is difficult, because if you've not got the working relationship with the owner quite early on and built that up, they're more likely to just say no and walk away. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're the captain. If it's genuinely not safe, you can't do it, because no one will thank you for taking a big risk and damaging the boat or the crew just to make it around to another bay or to get back for something.
I'm going to use this as a segue to psychological safety. So as a hypothetical, you might not have experienced this. If you have a toxic head of department that's creating catastrophic impact within the team, however, the owner likes this particular head of department, how would you handle an issue like that with the owner?
I've handled it. It was communicating it early. Look, sir, this is the problem that I've got. You see front of house, it's all roses and smiles, and that's great. I said, but the damage that's being done behind the scenes is a lot. And these are the consequences of keeping that person in position. And they said, well, we just want we've got one more trip coming up. We want that trip to go smoothly. So, okay, so that's, absolutely your choice. But, there will be fallout from that decision. So, okay, James, well, let's manage that later. And sure enough, at the end of the trip, we lost sort of 2/3 of that department. Owner came and found me, asked why there was high crew turnover, and I had to refer him back to the conversation. So, apologies, but I refer you back to the conversation we had. We identified this as a risk and as an outcome, and this is what we're seeing. Now, from this point on, we still have choices. We can continue on this path. We can continue with the high crew turnover, and your service will suffer as a result, or we can make the changes that are required.
Fantastic.
We made the changes.
Yeah. But this goes back to your point about not keeping any surprises from the owner and being as transparent as possible. And it served you in the end to be transparent, because you could back it up with evidence and refer to the initial conversation.
I knew when I told him, on the run up to that particular trip, that he wouldn't be happy to make the change. It was too close to that trip. But it was important for me to pass the information on to him so that he can just sit and dwell on it and just be aware that behind the scenes things weren't great. And he did come to me afterwards and said, I spent some time watching the crew and listening and just paying a bit more attention. And I picked up more of what you were saying. Okay, great. So, there's those sorts of things. It helps to build up your relationship with the owner, because he learned, okay, well, if James has come to me and told me that there's a problem, there probably is, and I should probably listen.
Fantastic. Okay, so have you ever experienced a breakdown in communication and had to repair this rapport, working relationship with the owner?
Yes, I was involved in a particularly big and difficult project nearly 10 years ago. So I was still early in my yachting, in my captain's role. So I'd been a captain, I guess, for about 5 years at that point. So, and it had taken me a little bit of time to get that job. And it was with a new management company that I hadn't worked with before. And it was a very challenging project in a shipyard. And things weren't going well, but it was being managed by the management company, not by myself. And a lot of information was being withheld from the owners, and I was under instructions not to pass that information on or to let them deal with it. And it just wasn't happening. So ultimately, the relationship broke down. I wasn't able to fix it. And I left because I could see that eventually it was all going to get dumped on me anyway. So I left the project. But he very quickly afterwards replaced the management company. He called me and said, what's going on? Now, what I should have done and how I would deal with that again comes back to picking the phone up. But if you've got to that point, go and see them. I had an opportunity to fly over to see him and actually sit face to face and go, look, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. This is where the money's going, and this is where it should be going, and actually explain it to him face to face. And I wish that I did it. I really wish that I had done that, dealt with it, because the outcome for me was the same. I was going to leave the project. So whether I left the project and it was all just dumped on me anyway by management, which happens, or I was going to get on a plane, go and see him, and then deal with the aftermath of management being upset that I'd gone to see the owner, the outcome was going to be the same. And actually, for my own sanity, I really wish that I'd got on the plane and gone and sat with him in his office face to face and dealt with it. More recently, I had a similar scenario where the communication with the owner wasn't great, and there were gatekeepers between myself and the owner, which were not something that he had necessarily put in place, but they had put themselves in as gatekeepers to access him. And at the end of the summer, I sort of had a bit of a thing with the gatekeepers and said, look, I can't continue doing the job unless I have access to the owner to pass this information, because we're not getting the information back that we need to continue operating in the way that he wants. So I made the decision and I went and saw him in London, and we had lunch. We went over budgets. We covered all sorts of things that I had previously been told were sort of not to be discussed with him. And I said to him, I'm sorry, but my instructions were not to discuss these things with you. And he was shocked. He said, well, why not? The captain, I employ you to manage the vessel and the finances and the budgets. So, from that point on, he and I had a great working relationship. And he said, pick the phone up at any time. He said, if I can't speak to you because I'm in a meeting, I'll decline the call, but I will call you back. He said, I know that if you're calling, then there's something important. And from that point on, we took the boat quite literally halfway around the world, whereas before it had really struggled to get anywhere. But it was because we'd had those conversations, those difficult conversations. I'd explained it to him. He understood it. All of a sudden, the money flowed and we got the jobs done that we needed to do. And then we delivered the boat for him when he wanted it. And that was his thing. He said, I'll give you the money to do this, but I want to use my boat. If I'm not giving you the money, if I can't then use my boat. So I said, all right, that makes perfect sense. Give me the money and I'll give you your boat. And we did. And, we delivered for him consistently over pretty much 2 years. And the boat continues to run, I think, very well with the captains that are still there. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So when it comes to owners and perhaps unrealistic expectations, how do you manage that? Excuse me.
Unrealistic expectations from owners. That's, who'd have thought?
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to understand where the expectation came from. Where have they got that idea from that they can do that?
The source.
Yeah, what's the source? Is it a charter broker who sold a trip that is, unrealistic? We had one that wanted to send us through the Corinth Canal in 2004. Where I was working on a big sailboat, a big Perini, and they had sold a charter to the clients, sent us the itinerary, and we were picking up in Athens and going off to do some stuff, but it required us running through the Corinth Canal. Well, the problem with that was our mast was too big. So there were some really slightly awkward conversations with this client that, well, we can't do that. So actually understanding where he'd got that information from was key, so we could go back to the source, and then the source could correct it, and we went around the bottom. And obviously we couldn't go through. I think, dealing with unrealistic expectations, it is challenging, and it can be something as simple as, well, why haven't you got X piece of fruit on the boat? Well, we're in Alaska and we have to fly everything in and not everything's available. Well, why not? Well, we're in Alaska, to unrealistic expectations of where to put the boat and how to manage it and how to run it, an unrealistic expectation of the size of the budget, for example. It's getting back to the source, and then it's just being able to calmly break down that expectation as to why it's unrealistic, and not sort of, it's very easy to go, okay, well, we'll try and make this work for you, sir, and then leave. And then you're in the background. I'm like, how the hell are we going to do this? If you say to them, I'm going to go and try and figure this out for you, when you know that you can't, you're only setting yourself up for failure, and you're sort of reinforcing their unrealistic expectation, because they'll go back and go, well, the captain's going to go and try and figure it out. So it's being honest with them with that expectation, kind of from day one. Captain, we want X. So that's not something we're going to be able to do. We can find some alternatives for you. What would be an alternative if you can't, we can't do X? What would be an alternative that you might prefer to do? Because X isn't possible.
Yeah.
I had one owner that was pointing at a bay as we were going past. He said, in there, Captain, let's go and anchor in there. I said, so that's not going to be possible.
Oh.
He said, I've seen boats in there. We can absolutely go in there. Why can't we go in there? I said, so I can get the boat in there once for you. Oh, right, that's fine. I said, but I can't get it back out again. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, it's too shallow. I said, but if we get a really good run up, I can probably get the boat in there. I said, I just won't be able to get it back out again. Now, thankfully, I had a good rapport with the owner, and he chuckled and said, okay, fine, Captain. I understand. Let's go somewhere where we can get in and get back out again.
Yeah.
But there was no point me trying to sort of tell him at that point, well, let me see what I can do, because I knew I couldn't do it. So, right from when they make that unrealistic expectation, that demand,
yes,
it's sort of nipping it in the bud straight away. So that's not something we're going to be able to do, but maybe, we can find something else that we can do instead.
Which goes back to that tool of reframe and carving the narrative in the direction that you ultimately want. And the other point there that you said, which was so spot on, and I'm putting pressure on myself to remember what it is. I can't remember. So what is it? So reframe, and then don't back yourself between a rock and a hard place and make it even more difficult for you.
Yeah. Yeah. The minute that you tell somebody, oh, okay, I'll see if I can make that happen, when you know that you can't, where do you go from that? That's really difficult. I think it's important when you talk to these guys is to keep it positive. If you just go and say, no, we can't do that, and walk away, well, that's not something that they're used to hearing. They don't want to hear it. I get that. So it's trying to be positive, and, well, we can't do this, but let's look at doing that. But you have to do that kind of straight away, because otherwise you do leave yourself, having to go back later on and explain, actually, I can't do the thing that you wanted. And, we've tried to figure out what we can do. And in all that time, his expectation of it happening has been increasing. He's waiting for it to happen when you knew it couldn't. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, I know that I've got a lot more questions to ask you, and I'm not going to get through them all. So I think this calls for another interview. But what we have discussed is running a webinar on this subject so we can deep dive into particular topics. But for those who are listening and want some key takeaways, some actual steps that they can take right now, if you had to run a masterclass on how to talk to millionaires, what would be your 3 core principles?
Those 3 core principles. Hang on a second. I've got my notes here. Honesty. Number 1, honesty. The minute that you pass on information that's either not correct or not verified, you're not hiding to nowhere. Face to face, especially if it's difficult. If it's a difficult conversation.
Yep.
Face to face, and that's either a video call. It's get on a plane and go and see them. Walk to the aft deck and have the conversation with them. There's a bit of a step down. It's pick the phone up. Don't just send them an email and wait for a response. Send the email and then pick the phone up. Calmness. If you get excited with them, they'll get even more excited. So just calm. Remember, they chose to buy the boat. If you didn't force it on them, they've made decisions that's led to a particular point. So just remain calm with them. They're human beings. They have concerns about their assets. They have concerns about their holiday. They have concerns about how their friends are going to see the holiday, experience it, that sort of thing. So if you can remain calm and treat them as a human being kind of on the same level as you, there's always a bit of a deference to owners, but if you can be confident enough to talk to them on a par in a calm manner, I think you'll be all right.
Thank you so much, James, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
I always love connecting with you. And we will keep everyone tuned about the webinar so that you can partake in the discussion and ask your questions. And I'm sure James will do a fantastic job of answering them for you. As a caveat, he did mention at the beginning of the session that this is just based on his lived experience. So you've got to remember that there's not one size fits all. Yeah.
That's it. That's really important. We've seen different management companies and different management styles. We all know that there's owners that behave wildly different, and some of them are more manageable than others. But hopefully there's a few tidbits there that you can sort of dribble into your daily dealings with owners.
Thank you, James.
Absolute pleasure.
If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.